Hey there, today we're going to talk about escrow. For some reason it popped in my head that I kind of wanted to sing about it, and I'll do that. Let's talk about escrow, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Just kidding, that's the end of my singing. So as far as escrow goes, escrow can come up in donation agreements, in surrogacy arrangements. And today I'm just kind of going to focus on it more in the surrogacy context. We can talk about escrow with an egg donation in another video, but basically with escrow, at least you have to look at your state law to see at first whether it's required. Some states require a independent escrow company to hold the funds that the surrogate is going to receive. So I practice surrogacy law in Florida. We do not have anything within our statutes requiring escrow. However, it's absolutely a best practice for the protection of all the parties involved, really especially the surrogate, that there be an escrow account set up that's well funded to ensure that the surrogate has money set aside to pay the obligations of the agreement, whether something comes up in the parent's life that might create a financial hardship, or hopefully this is never the case, that the relationship deteriorates between the parties, that there's a neutral arbiter that releases the funds in accordance with the terms of the contract. So it can be risky if the parties decide not to use an escrow account, because really you're giving all the power of the finances to the parents to hopefully, as they said they will, comply with the terms of the agreement. But if something comes up financially or between the parties, the surrogate has less kind of control or the ability to know the funds are set aside to protect her. So all that being said, I think it's important that the parties are counseled on the importance of escrow. It's important to look to your state law to see if an escrow account is required and to work with a reputable escrow company. So it would be good to speak to your agency or your attorney for a couple names of reputable escrow companies to make sure it's not just a fly-by-night escrow company, and to best understand like their experience with surrogacy matters. You don't want, I work at a very large law firm. We hold escrow for real estate deals every single day, but we don't hold escrow for surrogacy matters because it's the whole involved process that requires the proper staff, the proper ability, resources to read the contract, be responsive to the parties. Some escrow companies have a portal where you can look at the funds, available balances, without having to bug them every 2 seconds to find out how much is in the account. So these are all things to look into when you're selecting an escrow company, kind of what is that visibility to be able to see the account, contact the company, how are payments made to the surrogate, things like that, so you kind of know who you're going to be working with throughout the process, because escrow is obviously a pivotal part of the journey. So when you get to the stage of the surrogacy contract with hopefully separate attorneys representing the parent and a separate attorney representing the surrogate, escrow will be a provision within the agreement that sets out typically which escrow company that everybody's agreed to. And I think it's important within this section of the contract to address a few other things that may or may not always be in the agreement, but I think these are things that are important to kind of flush out at the beginning. One of the first things is how much is being deposited into the escrow account and at what times. So many times there is some form of a chunk of money that is put into escrow before anybody's pregnant. And then sometimes agreements go one step further to require an additional amount of money to be deposited once there's a confirmed heartbeat. So these decisions really will just depend on what the terms of the arrangements are between the parties, how much is being put in right away versus maybe adding in a little more later if it's maybe not as much at the very beginning. So it's really a case-by-case analysis, but you want to make sure that the escrow account is well funded. So if God forbid something happens to the parents or the relationship, that there's funds in there to pay a good portion of the surrogacy expenses. Now, a second kind of point within the agreement that I think is important to discuss is what minimum balance should the parents maintain in the escrow account. Generally speaking, I would say I see there's generally kind of standard amounts, and I would say it varies between a domestic intended parent and an international intended parent. So the amount that a domestic intended parent needs to keep in escrow is generally a little bit less than that required of an international parent, just by the nature of them being within the United States, and the ability to kind of obtain that money might be a little more straightforward than it would be in trying to recover money from an international parent, where just getting the money into an escrow account might be more complicated, making international wire transfers and things like that. So one of the third points that I like to look at is how long does the money need to stay in escrow after the process is done. So there may be different times depending on if there is a birth, if there's not a birth, but you want to make sure that the escrow is certainly funded for a certain period of time after a delivery or end of contract, to make sure that any medical expenses or payments that are due under the contract are paid, and there's money in the account, still keeping a certain minimum balance in that account post-birth or post-end of contract, because it's always better to have some money set aside versus having to hunt it down to pay bills. Now, that being said, a bill might come a year after a delivery. So as long as the medical services are incurred within the time the parents are obligated to pay it, it'd be great if the funds are still in escrow, but if not, the contract generally contemplates that the parents are still responsible for any medical bills incurred during a certain period of time, whether or not there's still funds in escrow. So I think an escrow company is an invaluable service to the parties, an important one to really consider. I see this a lot in self-matches when people find their surrogates on their own, that they may kind of meet and speak, which is wonderful, but they say, we're fine without an escrow. And then they all speak to their attorneys. Specifically, the surrogate speaks to her attorney, and at that point she may be counseled, rightfully so, about the importance of escrow. And at that time, in a self-match, they may now see the importance of an escrow and actually use that service. And as to any escrow service, the intended parents will be the one paying the escrow company's fee. So they're generally around the same amount, but it is good to know how much they cost at the beginning. But it's well worth it for the smoothness of the process. And quite honestly, it really takes the needing to discuss money and payments out between the parties, so they can focus on all the other great things involved in their pregnancy. So if you have any questions regarding escrow, please feel free to reach out. My name is Marla Neufeld. I practice reproductive law in Florida, and I'm happy to help you.